Hi, everyone. Welcome to that virtual session of the CLAS speaker series. Today, we have the honor of getting Professor Álvaro Bernal, who is our professor of Spanish and Latin American literature and the Spanish program coordinator at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. He will talk about, he will give a talk about mapping Bogota, memory, space, and urban imagination. So, Dr. Álvaro Bernal, besides being a professor, he's also the author of two books about Bogotá, Percepciones e imágenes de Bogotá, Expresiones literarias urbanas, that had two editions, one in 2010, another one in 18, and another book called Bogotá, Realidades, delirios y ficciones, published in 2016. So we're very much looking forward for your talk, and we'll be delighted to have that in person also in the future. So welcome to CLAS, Dr. Bernard Reyes, and the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thanks for the chance to be here to share my experience, my knowledge through the different researches I have been doing. Thanks, Luis, for the invitation, Kaylin. I'm very happy to be here, and I think it's very important that the other campuses of the University of Pittsburgh get connected so we can participate in different talks. I'm gonna first double check my PowerPoint. Okay, you guys can see it.
Yes, we can.
Is everything clear? Okay. Well, for the first 10 minutes, I'll start with a short reading from a review of my two theoretical books on Bogota. Then I'll share a brief poem about the city by the Colombian poet Mario Rivero. As I read, I'll share some images here in PowerPoint, some slides of Bogota, perhaps to help us connect with the city and gently lead us into the topic. This is going to be like kind of introduction. And then I will concentrate on some literary representations of Bogota, some novels, some authors that I have been working through, well, many years. I have been study the city, Bogota, following, of course, the literary perspective during the last 25 years. So this talk entitles Mapping Bogota, Memory, Space, and Urban Imagination, and it combines literary studies, but also it's very related to urban studies as well. Let me begin with the short part in which I'm gonna talk about, like an introduction to the talk, and it's based on a review, as I mentioned before, review of the two books I have written. I want to invite you to imagine Bogota not just a city on a map, but as a living story, a place where streets hold memories, corners whisper secrets, and buildings keep traces of the past. A city that is both seen and felt, remembered and imagined. Today we will take a first step into this story exploring how Bogota moves between reality and imagination, and how literature and film help us feel its heartbeat. When we think about Bogota, what comes to mind? The busy streets, the very heavy traffic, the tall buildings, the older neighborhoods with their colonial charm, the small shops hidden in narrow streets, or the colorful graffiti that covers walls. Or maybe the stories people tell about life here, the memories they carry, and the way they imagine the city. How does a city become more than just streets and buildings? How do memories, dreams, and daily life make a city alive? Two studies help us explore this question. The first one, Percepciones, imágenes de Bogotá, the perception and images of Bogota, takes a broad approach using literature as a window into the city. Bogota, the book shows us, is not one simple place. It is a city with many layers, many differences, and many ways of life. It is like a patchwork of histories and communities, each with its own story. The book traces the city's changes over time, starting in the 60s with Consuelo Triviño's Prohibido Salir a la Calle. And here I have my translation, Forbidden to Go Outside. Moving through Antonio Caballero's Sin Remedio, No Way Out, and Mario Mendoza's novel. And ending with Alonso Sánchez Bautes, Al Diablo la Maldita Primavera. My translation of the title of that book, To Hell with This Bloody Spring. These novels show us how Bogota has changed from a city of bricks and streets into a city that is experienced, remembered, and imagined in many ways. They show the everyday life of people living in the city, the challenges they face, the hopes they carry, and the ways they make the city their own. The book also includes interviews with the authors, letting us hear how they see the city and how the city inspires their stories. These reflections give us a very human perspective, a reminder that a city is not just constructions, physical constructions, buildings, houses, streets, but the people inside them and the stories they leave behind. The second book, Bogotá, Realidades, delirios y ficciones, Bogotá, Reality, delirios, and fictions, looks at the city in a slightly different way. It examines not just the streets, but the culture of the city. It invites us to take a symbolic tour of Bogota, noticing events, neighborhoods, and social interactions as books that we can read and explain, rewrite, interpret. It considers memory, social class, commerce, and relationships, and even the nostalgia that the city can live in its inhabitants. It then moves on the current literature and films that show Bogota from the second half of the 20th century to today, using ideas from the scholars like Clifford Geertz, Beatriz Arlo, and Adrian Gorelick. The book shows how the city communicates meaning through its symbols, landmarks, and events. We see that even small spaces, a market, street, a park, a bus station, a bus stop, can tell stories about social life, inequality, and memory. This makes the city both a physical space and a symbolic one, full of meanings waiting to be discovered. So, what do these two books tell us together? Bogota is more than a simple single city. It is not uniform or the same everywhere. It is like a collage, many different pieces put together to form a larger picture. The city is experienced differently by different people, remembered differently depending on their experiences, and imagined in many ways by writers, filmmakers, citizens, poets. And as we look at the city in literature and film, we start to understand both its realities and its dreams, the way it functions, the way it's remembered, and the way it's imagined. Now imagine walking through a city. What do you notice? What do you see? What do you feel? Just buildings and streets? Or do you feel the lives inside them? The memories the streets hold, the stories the city could tell, how a city shapes the people who live there, and how the people, in turn, shape the city. Bogota asks us to feel all of this persistently. It asks us to consider who lives here, who remembers, who imagines, and who tells this story. We can also think about the quiet march of time in the city, how Bogota has changed over decades, how politics, migration, and social struggles shape the neighborhoods, how all the residents recall the city compared to younger generations. These differences in memory creates layers, layers that we can read in literature, in films, and in the daily life of the streets. As we move forward, keep in mind that Bogota is both physical and mythical. You can walk its streets and take photos, but you can also explore it through stories, memories, and imagination. This interplay between reality and fiction, past and present, memory and imagination is what makes Bogota such a fascinating city to study, to explore, to live, to understand, to explain, to walk. I invite you to reflect, thinking about a city that is this way can change how you see other cities. Can every city be understood as more than a collection of buildings, houses, and streets? Bogota gives us a way to think about memory, space, and imagination. Not only in Colombia, but in our own cities as well. And perhaps, as we listen to these stories and imagine these spaces, we can start to notice the hidden lives, the quiet stories, and the dreams that every city carries. Now, what I'm gonna do is to read a poem that we really like it, and it's related to this topic, of course. I'm gonna read it in Spanish and then I'm gonna read it in English. He dirigido a la calle mis versos por el poeta Mario Rivero. Calle lodosa, vapuleada por el viento, calles de Bogotá con eterno invierno, con frío y con smog. Calles que se rindieron hace tiempo. El progreso borró los nombres. Calle del Embudo, calle de los Chorritos, calle del Molino del Cubo, de la Cajita de Agua, calle de Venera. Calles que se extienden con casitas de paredes de adobe o de tierra cruda. Calles recorridas paso a paso, contadas y medidas en la rigurosidad de la experiencia. Deambulando solitario, contento de estar solo, sin nada más que fumar y callar. y desde luego, caminar. Let's see the translation. It's my translation. I hope it's as successful as the original one, of course. Translating poetry is really, really difficult. And we don't have an English version, so this is my version. I've taken my verses to the street by Mario Rivero. Muddy street hit by the wind. Streets of Bogota with never-ending rain. With coal and white smoke in the air. Streets that gave up long ago. New times took away their names. Final Street, Little Fountains Street, Mill Street, Waterbox Street, Venera Street. Streets that go on with small houses made of mud and brick, made by mud and brick. The street and the street that I walk step by step, counting and remembered through hard and careful days, walking alone with nothing but smoke and silence, and of course, the sound of my steps. Well, this is a kind of introduction. So let's talk about what I have been doing. This is gonna be like, of course, very general because we don't have the time to, but at least you are gonna be able to understand what I have been doing. Um, I grew up in Bogota, of course, a city that never stays the same. Every time I go back, I return to Bogota, my city. I see always new construction, new buildings, and new problems, of course. At the same time, new ways of life. Today, Bogota has more than 11 million people, making it one of the biggest, the largest cities in South America, probably the fourth one. We have Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, and probably Lima is bigger than Bogota. What interests me most is how literature captured this constant change, evolution, transformation. How writers, authors, poets show a city that is alive, complex, difficult, violent, aggressive, full of memory and history. So in literature, Bogota isn't just a background, it's a real character. It's shaped by memory, imagination, and everyday life. And we can see that through the different stories, poems, and novels. This is very interesting because in the past, our literature was more concentrated on rural areas. I'm talking about in the 20s, 30s, 19th century. We didn't have big cities, at least in Colombia. But then everything, of course, changed after the 50s, 60s. And here we have big, of course, big cities, not only Bogota, we have Medellin, Cali, Barranquilla. But the big one is Bogota. When I was saying this, I was trying to say also that we didn't have a lot of literature related to the city, a lot of literature, stories, poems, novels that could describe not only the city, but also the life, the culture, the different lives of people there. Mm. But little by little, that conception has changed a lot. So, as I said, Bogota is a character in our literature. It's a protagonist. So my ideas always are related to how to see memory could change the way people experience the city. To look at how different authors, poets can describe the sounds, the images, the transformation, the problems, the emotions, to compare how different, could be the reality and the fiction. Many times it's the same. The novels, the narratives I have been analyzing do not make up a new Bogota. It's pretty much a Bogota that is a realistic one. So when reading these novels, the ones I'm gonna talk later, is pretty much to see the city itself with the avenues, the parks, the squares, and everything is happening in Bogota. So there is a very clear connection between them. So this help us understand how personal and probably collective memories connect with their stories, the authors' stories. There's a very close relationship. I'm using ideas from cultural studies, literary theory, and of course, spatial and memory studies, mainly from Lefebvre, Desertot, and Beatriz Sarlo. Sarlo is doing a lot or she was doing a lot with Buenos Aires, for example. The description, the narration of Buenos Aires, not only as a place, beyond that. Mm. They help us see Bogota as a place where past and present constantly meet, they come together. The city spaces keep social meaning. They tell stories about identity and culture. This is really important because in our cities in Latin America, we can have that collage, that combination between past, present, and even the future. Somebody can tell me, well, but you can say that in every single city. It's not the same. When you go to visit a city in Europe, you are pretty much looking for something about the past, the heritage, that particular past. That could be, of course, amazing if you go to Rome or to Paris. But then in our cities, and when I say our cities, I'm talking about Latin America, we see that mixture, that combination of different times together. They all are or could be in the same space, the past, the present, and even in the future. Here we have a collage with four pictures of Bogota. We see it, let's say, the contemporary city, the modern city, very busy city, full of light and energy, but also traffic, heavy traffic, and a lot of tensions. Important to mention that transportation, public transportation in Bogota is a real issue. Transportation shows how progress and daily frustration exist side by side. It is a good image for the contradictions in urban life. One of the basic problems in Bogota is public transportation. We are now building an elevated metro. Mhm. So we are very behind in that particular aspect. If we compare to Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Caracas, even Lima. Mhm. One picture that I really like is this one that is probably one of the famous images taken by Carlos Caicedo Zambrano, a reporter and photographer. that shows two nuns watching a young girl in miniskirt. It's a very simple image, but it says a lot. It's tradition looking at modernity, or two different worlds, opposites meeting in one frame. The tension is part of Bogota's story, pretty much. That could be a good comparison if we can define Bogota just an image. It was taken in the 60s. You see the fashion, for example. But then we have uh, decades later this Pride March photo that shows another kind of social change. Nobody could imagine this before 34 years ago, for example, here. Public space becomes a stage for identity, for freedom, for visibility. It is the same city still negotiating who belongs and who gets to be seen. In that sense, we can say that Bogota, after so many different efforts, after so many years, is becoming more and more and more liberal. It was in the past, and we can see it in literature as well, before the 15th, a place very conservative, very traditional. It was just like a big town. But the transformation of Bogota became, I mean, had a great evolution. And now the city became and one of the most important cultural places in South America. This is relevant because when I was a kid, I remember my dad told me that in the 50s, 40s, and even before, the two important cities in Latin America were Mexico, DF, and Buenos Aires. He used to tell me like the good movies, the art, the good music, the books, the authors were coming from the two extremes. Mexico, DF, the movies, the actors, and Buenos Aires. By that time, two big cities uh, in a huge, huge distance, with a huge distance to the other ones. Let's say Santiago in Chile, or Lima, Quito, Bogota. Well, that has changed a lot. Mhm. This is one of the things that I really want to highlight, how we can change our views about so many different things, how we have become more liberal, more democratic. Here we have also the popular Carrera Séptima in Bogota. Carrera Séptima, or Seventh Avenue, one of Bogota's most symbolic streets downtown. And you see the transformation from the quiet 1920s black and white. You don't see people, pretty much, very few people, and you see houses, and you see the representation of the power of the Catholic Church. You see there the cathedral, um, but then you see the other ones with more people. You can see the its transformation from the quiet times to today's traffic and chaos and people. It is like a timeline of the city's social and economic change. Mm, I always like to think of Bogota as a book written and rewritten through memory, imagination, and history. Artists, writers, poets keep reading the place, the city, giving new meaning to the different spaces and the people. Bogota, Bogota's identity isn't fixed. It grows from different layers, from history, from imagination, from memory, and lived experience. It is a city you can live, but also a city you can read. Memory, very important in this particular topic. Memory shapes how people see and use the city. Spaces are not neutral. They hold emotions and stories and hopes and sadness and problems and trauma. Lefebvre remind us that the past still lives in urban form, and Sartre also mentioned that the daily actions of people are part of the city itself. So memory and identity are always in motion. They are always being rewritten. And in that relation, the past is also conflictive. It could be a problem as well. Interesting to see once again that in our places, our countries, or in Bogota in particular, we see that dynamic between past, present, and future again in the same area, in the same place. Mhm. Not a time, not a long time, a long time in Bogota, 15, 10 years ago. We used to see horses. This is interesting. Horses, um, buses, trains, everything coming together in the same area. Well, now I'm gonna try to make the connection to the novels I have been studying, novels that could be mirrors, because again, my interest is in reading the city through different pieces of literature which follow or imitate or copy or simply make the connection to the reality. Here we have four key authors. There are more, of course, but I believe these ones are very important in the way they describe the city and the urban experience. Mhm. Consuelo Treviño, author that lives in Spain, in Madrid, she describes the Bogota in the 60s and in the 70s, the transformation of Bogota. Luis Fayad, a very good writer who lives in Berlin, has a really interesting novel about Bogota in the 70s. We have Antonio Caballero, he passed away last year, I think, describing Bogota in the 70s and in the 80s. And Mario Mendoza, a very commercial author, writer, mm, that help us understand the different changes Bogota has had probably in the last 25, 20 years. The novels I study show real Bogota, the streets, neighborhoods, daily life, and the ideology that people have many, many, many times. I'm going to explain this a little bit later. When I say ideology, I'm thinking about the collective memory and the collective imagination that people have in different places about everything. We can see that. We can see that in the novels. Prohibido salir a la calle. It is forbidden to go out on the street. Mm. A girl growing up in the south of Bogota, and the south of Bogota is related in that memory imaginary to poor people pretty much. It's the poor south. Nobody wants to live in the south of Bogota. Doesn't matter it has good could have good neighborhoods as well. But in the imagination and the idea that people have, we think that the south is very limited in many aspects in terms of education, culture, security. It is kind of difficult in many, many aspects. So here we have the story of a girl, little girl, growing up in the south of Bogota, you know, and she experiences class limits, violence, and change. Um, this story store memory into living experience and connect private lives with the city transformation. Hmm. This is one of the covers of the main novel Prohibido Salir a la Calle. There are different editions. And then I have next to the cover, I have like a picture of a popular neighborhood in Bogota. Picture that can be taken. I mean, it's very common in different cities in Latin America. I mean, that particular picture could be taken in Guatemala City, could be taken in Caracas, could be, I mean, the same image, in Buenos Aires. Even in Buenos Aires, that Buenos Aires projects or reflects that idea that is closer to Europe, and that's myth, about, well, but that's another story. So, mm, prohibido salir a la calle, we see the streets as a living archives. We see the south of Bogota, seen following, those ideas related to power and related to pretty much money. People who live in the south of Bogota, again, are always connected to those ideas of middle class and probably low class and the marginal part of the society. Um, I have here a quote that says, "This novel shows a Bogota marked by fear and silence, where the protagonist grows up isolated in a middle low class home. Important to see that the society in Colombia is very fragmented. Society characterized by pronounced class disparities. A society profoundly divided along socioeconomic lines. A social order shaped by the lasting effects of colonial rule. That's even interesting and a little bit crazy. We still have those ideas about um, classes, power, a wealthy minority, a middle class with a lot of limitation, and a lot of poor people. So in Prohibido Salir a la Calle, okay, this one, it's important to see that the description, the narration, the experience of the protagonist comes from the south to Bogota to the north. And here we have the map again, the idea of a very poor south. She is a little girl, and then when she becomes a teenager, goes for the first time in her life to the north of Bogota. and she realizes how different that part of the city is. Even the people, the color. She sees that there are more white people in the north. This is, of course, a clear idea about segregation, not only in Bogota, in Colombia in general, related to race or ethnicity. Well, Los Parientes de Esther by Luis Fayad. My translation, The Relatives of Esther. This novel looks at Bogota in the 70s, a city growing fast with, again, very strong class divisions. This is the core of the society in Colombia, class division, sadly. And here we see the family story mirrors social pressures and the shift to modern life. Memory links the home to the larger city, showing how both change together. Memory is tied to everyday life, and the neighborhood reflects the struggles of poverty and family bonds under pressure. Here we see something really important. The family is a mirror of what is happening in the city. That division, social division that I have been talking, very common in Colombia, very obvious in Bogota, about the different places where people live. We see it in a family. In the family, there is a kind of social discrimination in the same family. So this is one of the points interesting related to this novel. Everything happens, or most of the action happens in downtown Bogota. That's why I have a picture of downtown Bogota in black and white. And you see the transformations again. And here we have the cover of the many editions of Luis Fayad. There is sad that we don't have translations of these novels. I almost forget this. Mhm. Um, and they deserve to be translated not only into English but also, in French and different ones. But still, we have very good writers, very good novels, wonderful stories, but we don't have translation. So if we don't have translation, is if we don't exist. Nobody knows Luis Fayad, or very few people. Okay? If we don't have French readers, if we don't have English readers, we don't exist. Mhm. Well, um, so I was talking about this novel and how family interactions between the family members are in a comparison to how the society, the different citizens behave in Bogota, pretty much related to social class and the social division I have been telling. We have also seen Remedio by Antonio Caballero. Oh, No Way Out. That's my translation. In Sin Remedio, we feel Bogota. We understand Bogota as a fragmented place, almost like a labyrinth. The narrative reflects the confusion and alienation of city life. Decay and memory works together. Mm. The city's physical decline mirrors the characters' inner struggles. It's a very powerful portrait of Bogota in the 80s, by the end of the 70s. Um, Portray of unhappiness, sorrow, sadness. You know, in Sin Remedio, we see once again a divided society. You see a young, wealthy guy who feels lost, And then the picture of different spaces between healthy neighborhoods, downtowns, cafes, and poor areas of Bogota. Here, what we see in terms of Bogota, mapping Bogota, is that the direction comes from the north of the city, and the imaginary, the north is the rich, where rich people live. And this guy go to discover, to explore, to have adventures in the unknown south of Bogota. Just remember the ideas of discrimination and segregation in Bogota. And he goes there and he discovers so many places and he interacts with people. Again, we have the portrait of that kind of division in Bogota, that unexplored south of the city. Here in this slide, we have two different covers of the novel. The second one with the guy walking, I think, is very successful because pretty much it's what the protagonist does. Just he wants to be a poet and he needs inspiration, and the only inspiration he can have is just going out, walking. He goes to different cafes, drinks, smokes. He interacts with different people, intellectual, wealthy people. He has a relative who is a priest. The power again, the Catholic religion in Colombia, in Bogota, a Catholic priest that is very corrupted. But of course, nobody knows that. He meets with prostitutes that are coming from rural areas of Colombia, and they go to Bogota. Every single city in Latin America has had local migration. And of course, Bogota has had that since the 40s and 50s with so many rural problems. And at some point, the civil war we had in the 50s and in the 60s. So we see that kind of migration. That's important to mention now that the real large migration we have in Colombia, and in this case in Bogota, as the most important city of the country, is the now we have with Venezuelans. Colombia has been traditionally close to migration. If you compare to other countries, Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Venezuela, even Mexico, we didn't have any migration, until now, the migration of Venezuelans in Colombia. And that has created another kind of interaction. In the past, in the 80s, the migrants were Colombians going to Venezuela because Venezuela was a rich country, 70s and 80s. Now it's the opposite. So now is the way Venezuelans used to treat Colombians in the 70s and 80s. Well, that's a way now is the way Colombians treat Venezuela with a lot of stereotypes, a lot of stereotypes. And I'm sure that kind of Bogota, that kind of interaction between the different citizens will be, of course, at some point written with the new novels, with the new stories, with the new points, narratives about Bogota. That's something that is going to happen very, very soon, I think. Well, so one more time, this novel goes from the north to the south. The novel by Consuelo Trevino was pretty much the opposite. From the south to the north, from the poor area to the rich area. Here is the opposite. But again, a very fragmented society and city as well. Well, we have Mario Mendoza. Mario Mendoza is a very commercial author. He sells a lot. In some academic circles, he is not considered as the other ones, the previous one I mentioned. However, for this study is very helpful because he is giving a good picture of Bogota in some particular areas. Mario Mendoza takes us to another Bogota, darker, raw, full of contrast. He focuses on the city most conflictive areas, marginal areas, violence, uh, crime, and social extremes. A lot of chaos. His characters search for meaning. Their memories give shape to the city. This particular one, the Scorpio City, it's pretty much a darker view of Bogota. Bogota with a lot of corruption, drugs, violence, sex work, a place of mystery, a lot of um, lost identities, you know. And in that sense, he was successful because we didn't have many authors, writers who were concentrating on that, you see, on some marginal areas of Bogota. Yeah, Mendoza portrays Bogota as a layer, a very chaotic city. So that's another view related also to memory, the experience of citizens could have in some particular areas of the city. So if we say that Antonio Caballero with Sin Remedio goes from the north to the south and Consuelo Triviño's Prohibido Salir a la Calle goes from the south to the north, and if we say that Luis Fayad, Los Parientes de Esther pretty much are in downtown center, the historic areas of Bogota, we have to say that Mario Mendoza is pretty much concentrated on the margin, on the areas that most people don't go because they are dangerous. I mean, because the violence. Okay, so this is another perspective and another view of the city. Hmm. Let me see the time. Well, okay. Um, Very general conclusions. I think literature lets us see Bogota as a living book where space, history, dreams, of hopes, imagination all come together. Fiction shows how memory and the city connect, shaping both personal experiences and shared stories. Authors, writers, poems take the city's chaos and make comparison and turn them into stories about inequality and justice, resilience, poverty, and even hope. The books I have been mentioning here follow Bogota's path from the margins to modern life. Again, the idea that in our countries, every single um, time period comes together. Mhm. There are many studies, related to that too. Memory and imagination are pretty much part of the city's real architecture, but not only the physical part. Okay, I'm not only about the streets and building. We are thinking about an architecture related to imagination and memory. Mhm. By reading Bogota through literature, we see mm, urban life itself as a story of identity and belonging that is also related to the way we are, the way other people see in us. Um, and that helps to create an identity as well related to the city and related to the citizens as well. For this particular talk, I have been using this theoretical text. Okay, once again, this is like a panorama of what I have been doing. Mhm. And the novels I was talking about were these four. Mm. again, there are more, and we have each time more and more literature related to Bogota that we didn't have before, as I said, in the 50s or 40s or even before. Okay, now we have a lot of literature related to the description narrating Bogota, but again, Bogota is not only as a background, Bogota as a protagonist. Mhm. But I always concentrate on the novels, the narratives in which, again, there is no a new Bogota, a fantastic Bogota. No, it's the real, the realistic one that we see when we go out. Mm. Well, this is pretty much what we have been doing. Thank you for your attention. And of course, if we have time for some questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
I see Christopher.
Let me read it. It's right here. Chat. An environmental history of Latin America. Sean Miller claimed that before the introduction of the car, the streets are where life took place in Latin American cities. How has the introduction of cars onto streets affected Bogota urban life, street culture, pedestrian? This is really, really important. I really appreciate the question. It's such a very complex issue. There are many things that we can say about this. In the past, for example, in the 60s and before, Bogota used to have trains, and little by little, the idea to have a better public transportation, according to the population, was one of the goals. Then the trains disappear, and then I believe with the influence of the United States, um, everybody wanted to have a car. Cars were introduced. The Ford, the Chevrolet. The idea of cars were um, very relevant in the imaginary of people. But cars have been historically expensive, and it's a symbol of status. In it was, well, not now, but in the past. So cars change as well the mentality of people and citizens. That relation that the citizen who have a car was just pretty much rich, a wealthy guy. So in that sense, we can say that the introduction of cars in Bogota or in Colombia um, supported, sadly, or highlight the social differences. Not everybody has a car, even now in Colombia. And those ideas about having car, synonym of being rich. So what I can think about it is that those ideas highlighted the social classes already. The difference between rich, middle class, and the working class. Having a car was a dream in the 70s, in the 80s, even when I was a kid, you know? Well, this could be part of the answer. But this is a very important point that I will probably need to think about it. Because at the same time, cars, people who do not have cars, they have to use the public transportation. And the public transportation in Bogota for a long time, even now, is a disaster. You guys have to go to Bogota and you will see that moving from the north to the south could take 2 hours or 3 hours. This is the only big city in South America and Latin America with almost 11 million people that doesn't have a metro. It still doesn't have a metro. So we still have buses, buses that represent the idea of a metro, like Transmilenio idea that was copied from one of the cities in Brazil, but a smaller city.
Um, I was thinking about while we wait to see if we have other questions. I went recently for the first time to Bogota, and I was actually fascinated by some of the aspects that you were highlighting, and especially these connections between what would be a contemporary or a city from the past and how the colonial city has been reshaped to become like a tourist destination, and all the ways in which the city is portraying the difficult past of the recent years and etc. So it was really interesting to think about the city as it's narrated, Bogota as it's narrated by different authors. But being from Rio de Janeiro, which was not quoted there, which is São Paulo, which is a very new city compared to Rio. I was kind of sort of wondering what you said about Latin American cities being different than other cities. And I'm not sure. I mean, I think for sure, if our comparison is with the North, like the European cities and the ways that they lost some part of the flavor. But, just thinking about, I mean, in Latin American context, I, our reflections about the big cities are so connected to our own experiences, and also about what is, let's say, so much has been written about cities in general, like Cortázar in terms of literature, but Angel Rama thinking about intellectual cities. But I was actually thinking about Calvino, the invisible cities, which, he's not really talking about Italy, but it's an imaginary city, but he could have. And just being recently, I don't know, in like a city that I loved, which was Istanbul. I was listening you talking about Bogota, and I was thinking, well, that could be also Istanbul. So it's just like a out loud reflection about how, to me, it seemed that, of course, it's not every city, but so many different cities could have that connection to a memory that you are arguing that Bogota has, and Bogota certainly has.
Yeah, of course, as I mentioned before, I mean, every single city, I mean, every capital, big, large city could have that connection, of course. And we can see that through literature. The point pretty much is in our cities, we have that collage that we don't see in other places. And of course, Latin American cities, African cities, Asian cities, places that have been through different colonization processes could have the same or very similar scenes, very similar situations. Um, when I say, for example, that we see in Bogota and it could happen in Rio de Janeiro, it could happen in Sao Paulo, in Caracas, in Guatemala City, in Managua, is that cohabitation of different times. Very simple example, you have a wonderful mall, very modern, contemporary, beautiful glasses, and very nice and fashionable brands, wonderful stores. But then out of the mall, you have indigenous people selling crafts, for example. Or the picture that I mentioned before, 10, 15 years, we have like an expressway, but we have horses at the same time. We don't have horses anymore in the streets, but just trying to look about that, and we can see that, I mean, Garcia Canclini used to mention that in culturas híbridas, hybrid cultures. Mhm.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, it's interesting, and I think it's a huge topic of debate. Um, we passed a little bit of time, but I'm assuming that there are no more questions, but if there are, we could take one more. It's hard on Zoom, right, when we are not physically in the same space.
Yeah, one thing that I think is not good, of course, is that we don't have English translations of these novels and the ones I mentioned,
Mhm.
you know. Um, Translations are new versions, and many times we are missing many details, but that's what we have. I mean, that's very important. So we can have different readers from different places, but we don't have that. Mm, those books, I mean, deserve to be translated into English and French at least, so people can have like that feeling, because the feeling I'm describing, the emotions and everything related to memory could sound very abstract, but when reading the novels, I mean, we can experience what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I agree. Yeah. All right. So thank you. Thank you for this wonderful talk. And thanks everyone for coming. I think this will be recorded for people who missed, will be able to catch up later. And I hope to see everyone soon, either virtually or in person in our next class speaker series. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much, Kelly, for this opportunity. And I'm very happy to be here, and I hope I'll have another chance to, in the near future to talk again.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks so much for everything.